What is up there, workforce? Chris here with WorkToGame, and I put out a video yesterday talking about patch 4.57, the world visit system, and what this kind of tool could mean for the future of Final Fantasy XIV. So if you haven't seen that video, feel free to go watch that first. This is going to be what we call community feedback, where we go through your comments and we actually continue that conversation on, especially around topics that seem to garner a really big conversation. So let's dive in. Now, the first comment here is the reason for the thumbnail, and so it is from Puff Adder, and it is, we need to build a wall to keep the other servers out. I thought this was really funny. That's the reason for the thumbnail and the title and all of that. And I had responded, as long as the Garleans pay for it. It really does shockingly show just how people are feeling about this. There is kind of this xenophobia in the raw sense of the word, this fear of change. And it's a natural human trait, and it comes from the fact that every time something bad has happened in our life, it's usually as a result of a change. And so a way to avoid bad is to just leave things well enough alone. And it's really not what I think gets us to a better Final Fantasy. You have to be willing to risk making some mistakes if we ever want to make Final Fantasy better, or something that at some point you won't be tired of because it's new and it's different in a good way. And so I think Square Enix took a risk here, and the rollout was so incredible. That's why I was such a fanboy over this. You guys know I'm usually the guy to point out the one little critique here and there. Brian's the overwhelmingly positive one here on the channel, and I couldn't find anything. It rolled out exactly the way intended. People who are like, oh, and I had a wait time if I couldn't get back to my server. That means your server didn't go down. That means that they have a system in place for when the server gets overfilled, and it's working. So, like, I just was really impressed, all in all, with the rollout of patch 4.7. So let's dive into that next comment. Oven Monkey said, along with many of you other ones lately, you need to upgrade your computer, my guy. So I did want to just touch briefly to all the new people here in the community. I play on a PS4 with keyboard and mouse. Brian plays on a PC with controller. When I play on my own, I play on a big screen with 1080p. It's to the right of my computer. But when I stream to you guys, when I record, things like that, I only have a 5K monitor. I'm on a Mac, and the Mac client on Stormblood runs like junk compared to previous Mac clients that Final Fantasy has had. And so I've chosen to play on it, and then to get recordings to you guys, I use an Elgato capture card. So that streams it over to my computer, and then because I just have the one monitor, I like to have things like stream health and all of that all around me. So I get in the habit of using a portion of my screen, which means that I lock it in at 720p and window capture that. And so that's how I've done that. So basically, it's going from the PS4 to an Elgato to my screen, being captured by OBS, and then I've been going through some changes on how to get to 1080p. That's where the test streams have come from. I have a lot of pre-recorded videos right now done in both definitions. I have a lot of B-roll that's in the old definition. So for a little while here, you're going to see my videos going back and forth between 720p and 1080 just as I make that transition. The goal is for me to be totally in 1080 before Shadowbringers drops. As for the load times on my PS4, they are what they are. I apparently have the slowest PS4 ever made. I bought it at launch. I've done nothing special to it. I haven't put a ton of hours on it. All I use it for is Final Fantasy, but everybody says I need to put a solid state drive on there, and that would kind of fix that. It's just not something that I've looked at. Brian and I have been on the fence on whether or not, I should find a way to pay for a PC, or we should just get me a solid state drive, and it hasn't been a big enough pain point. I mean, it's 30 to 60 second load times. The only reason you guys have seen them so much lately is I've been doing Let's Plays more, and I've been doing things where I show guides on gil per minute, in which case I want to account for the slowest possible load times, which apparently are mine. And so I show those off to show exactly how long something takes. But typically I've just been editing them out. I've been dealing with these load times forever. I was a PS3 player, and it was way slower than this. So let's dive into the next comment. Daniel Mitchell says, Blizzard Entertainment, there's always going to be issues with patch releases. It's unavoidable. Yoshi P and Square Enix, hold my beer. This is super funny, especially in the context of 4.57 rolling out so smoothly. But I will point out, these games have issues. I think BFA had a smoother launch than Stormblood. I think we've seen things like Raubon Extreme. We've seen different things like this. I'm shocked at how well a server migration and World Visit went simultaneously for North America. The people who were transferring in under 5 minutes. I'm sure it was hundreds, if not thousands, of transfers being processed at any given time. It is incredible how well this went. It doesn't guarantee us a smooth launch for Shadowbringers, but it does give me hope. And it's just really funny because these games do tend to go back and forth with who can step their foot into mud when it comes to the launch on something. And I feel like Square Enix, at least for the last year or so, knock on wood here, has been has been absolutely doing a better job of knocking that out, and ideally that gives them a smooth launch going into Shadowbringers. I wish for smooth launches for all video games, but that's just not where we're at in today's market. So, next comment. Last Order Films, who puts out some incredible guides, by the way, if you want to go check those out. A little bit smaller of a channel here on YouTube, getting started. Very, very thorough. So if you think that Brian and I kind of gloss over things sometimes for noobs, the few things that Last Order has had a chance to put guides out on, very, very thorough. I'm personally very happy and excited about the world visit system. It's so smooth, barring queues that is. I especially love how this opens up even more activities for streamers to participate in with their viewers and opens up new possibilities for content creators that can explore and create. Here's to hoping that in the future, cross-data play in at least the same continent would one day be possible. Aether and Primal, and I assume Crystal, have always been rumored to be in exactly the same physical place. I don't know if Square has ever publicly confirmed that, but that's always been what I've heard. So I don't know where that information entered my head, but Aether and Primal should just be like a really long Ethernet cord apart. And so ideally that would be the case. I would love to see cross data center play. I think more likely, based on the things they said out of FanFest before that, we'll see more data center wide features. They said they wanted a data center wide market board, but that wasn't possible at a technical level right now. So people talking about like, oh, the world visit system's allowing people to take advantage of the market. That's intended. They wanted as many things as possible to be done through the world visit system, and that if they could get the worlds to merge in a more finite, like in a more infinite way when it comes to the market board integrations, they would have done that. This was as far as they could push that. So I'm hoping that they're able to take this a little further in whatever. I don't want to think about the design team as being limited by technical issues. I want them to design whatever they want. So if they want servers to only be up to a certain number of people because they found that that's the size where good culture forms, then even if the hardware goes beyond that, that's where I want them to stop. But I don't want them to say, oh, we had 144 people in Eureka because that's the most the instance server could support. We would have preferred it to be in around 270 or 300 or whatever. I would like to see the technical capabilities of the market allow the designers to do whatever their wildest imagination dreams up that they think is going to create a good gaming experience. Thank you. Justin Yoshida talking about GameSpot, about the Stadia. It could effectively move hardware limitations, things like my slow load times, as well as server population, zone borders, things like that. Because basically, this comment is saying, if you guys aren't familiar with Google Stadia, it's the most recent iteration at a company trying to back a streaming only client, where basically you would just do it through a browser, ideally at 1080p, 60 frames, and you're going to have this incredible experience, and that you would need the power of something like a phone. You'd need the power of a tablet. And so basically your TV could have an application that powers this, and that could be through a Chromecast or an Apple TV. Anything with access to a browser could pull this up, and then you'd be able to use their controller is what they of course want to market, but that they're willing to create integrations with other controllers. And so it would allow cross-platform to become this term that's way more abstract than, oh, it works on these set platforms that are all established in their own right. It's like, no, anything with an internet connection. There could be a Kindle one day that could play Final Fantasy XIV if it was running through something like the Stadia. That would be a huge undertaking, and it wouldn't work as well on some platforms as it runs now, unless they just host the whole game on Stadia. Exactly. So that's where it's an interesting topic when we talk about like the future of the game and the future of possibilities. It's intriguing to think about what could happen with the technology that's being announced today. When we start to talk about conversations like Stadia and VR, you're talking about a total paradigm shift. You're talking about something where you'd be rebuilding the game from the ground up, a 3.0, if you will, and the difference between 1.0 and 2.0 required an entire engine change on the background. Ideally, they would be able to swap the engines out kind of as a hot swap. So in a perfect world, in my mind, we wouldn't have to see us move to a Final Fantasy 16 or 17 to do it, but maybe we will. And there could be a day where that makes sense. I mean, to say that this game is going to be around 100 years from now sounds ridiculous. So that means that sometime between today and then, there's probably a chance that this game will move on to being something different than it is today. Incredibly interesting thought. I am Soup. I'm hoping for the cross DC play some way, kind of same idea here, but I hope they don't implement it in the WoW style sharding. So I wanted to stop and take a brief moment for anybody who's seeing all this pop up in the comments of that other video and saying, what is WoW sharding? So WoW and 14 run into a lot of the same design issues, right? Both games want flying, both games want a combat system, both games want a crafting system, both games have server things that they have to hurdles they have to hop over, and they don't necessarily always solve them the same way. A lot of their quest design feels very similar to me. A lot of their combat systems have fragments of things that line up with each other. Oh, this class exists in both games and has similar roles and things like that. They're both tank, healer, DPS, 4-man versus 5-man dungeons. But when we talk about this kind of cross server play, the party finder, duty finder, like the ability to queue up with people from other servers has been around in both games for quite a while now. The ability to hop into like a pug roulette style system where you can just hop in with random people has been around in both games for quite a while, especially to get into the casual level of raiding. That has been a common and highly utilized feature. It comes with pros and cons. It has absolutely removed some of the old school MMO feel of like, I have to go into town and I have to find a healer, and then once I find a healer it takes so long to get to the instance, and then once we're there we queue in and a warlock summoned us or whatever, and so by the time you get into a dungeon you've put all this time into each other and you've invested it, so when one of you makes a mistake you don't necessarily give up on that person and just quit, because you know that, well, we'd have to go back to the capital city, we'd have to dig for another healer, and so you tend to say, hey, can we just deal with the one we have? Hey, can I coach you up? Can I help you in some way? Can one of us offer off healing on one of our caster classes? Let's clear the content together and then let's never party again. And that fostered this community where once you found a good group, you're like, God, I want to use them every time. And so even outside your guilds, free companies, things like that, you would have these sets of friend lists that you'd made in game that you trusted and relied on. And that went away with those systems. But the advantage is it made dungeons and raids a whole lot easier to just say, I only have an hour to play tonight. I'm just going to crank out a dungeon or two, or I'm just going to crank out one raid boss. And so, like, there's pros and cons there, but this system didn't change that, better or worse. World Visit wasn't about the dungeon content. So the sharding system is how they deal with open world content, much like their two different implementations on the leveling system. Sharding is basically where you run out into the world and picture the world as a bunch of different little micro zones, because they don't have single load zones, so it's not real clear where the server views a zone as starting and stopping. It can literally be in the middle of like a Zeem step. It would be in the middle of the zone, and as you're running it can literally toss you into different instances, just like we can be in different instances of Dome and Enclave or anything else. So you're seeing something that I'm not. Now, it does this live and it does this without asking. So it constantly is just running in the background. And most of the time, that's a really nice thing. You're constantly being put into what the server feels the best experience is. But what'll happen is you'll see like a mining vein, or you'll see like a character or something that you want to interact with in some way, and you'll have to clear a mob to get there or whatever. And by the time you get there, you will be put onto a different shard and it will wink out of existence. Because you are no longer in that universe. And now it works with party play. When you party up, it automatically moves you the same shards. It does all sorts of cool migrating. What Final Fantasy has chosen to do is it's chosen to make it an opt-in system where you go from these set kind of bridges, if you will, these controlled points. So you have to be not only in one of the capital cities, but in that aetheryte room. So you're literally moving, picture those as these little mini Willy Wonka elevators, and those are the only things that can take you world to world to world. And no other part of the world has to form that connection. So you avoid conflict, like what happens if I change shards and immediately get attacked by something? When I jump into like basically the WoW's equivalent of a Fate, when I jump into an open world boss and I'm fighting it with a big group and I get to the end and I've partied up with that through their equivalent of like a party finder system, and I right click leave party and it drops me back onto the shard I was on before because it thinks that's a better connection, sometimes I get attacked by a respawn of that same boss. That doesn't happen in Final Fantasy. It cannot happen because you never change shards. We don't even kick you back to your server under any circumstances. The only way to get home is through that safe space, that safe elevator. And so that's a key difference here. And so saying, I hope they don't implement it, well, they're not going to, because we already know how they're doing it. So as the lines blur and we get to the point where maybe there's hardware where everybody just runs on one big server and all this stuff happens seamlessly and perfectly, right now they're operating within what they can technically do. The technical limitation is the issue. The goal is seamless play that always has you surrounded by the appropriate number of people, never more, never less, and always the ones you care about more than the ones you don't. and a perfect play experience. And they're both using code and hardware to get there as best as possible, and they're getting there differently. Now, they may meet at the same pinnacle 50 years in the future because they're both headed towards the same goal of that perfect play experience, but they're getting there totally differently. So along the way, their pain points, the various points where they may trip and they may fall are going to be different. And I think Final Fantasy learned a lot from watching WoW do it, just like WoW's level sync system works so differently than Final Fantasy's, because I think they had a chance to go see, hey, what other level sync systems are out there? Final Fantasy XIV has had level sync way longer than WoW has. And so, you have to say, wow, it's going really well for 14. Well, I would hope so. They have the advantage of seeing how sharding has been working, because this kind of instancing and sharding, and to varying degrees, has been around as early as, I remember in Lich King, when I was questing with friends at the launch of Lich King on day one, people dropping in and out of instances, where you would literally see your friend fade out of existence. And so now that they've basically added cross-server to that capability, it is its own animal, and it has pros and cons. And so if your fear is that they're going to be the same, they're not going to be. Whether that's good or bad, they're not. Sinister, the world visit system has ruined hunts on my server. Early pullers from other servers every time. Lagfest trying to get into the main cities. This has been since it started, which is not very long. Let's keep that in mind. We used to wait on Ferry to do last calls. Now you can't even get there. I believe that they talked about that still being reportable as a form of griefing, so I believe that should be a thing. In addition to that, if etiquette is really stated like that, as long as it's not like an entire other link shell or something pulling it, if it's just one guy, you can just let them die the same way as you can let somebody die if they run into the next raid room, if they sprint ahead of everybody else and pull the boss. As long as you're not all in that room, then let them pull. Like, they'll just die. But this is going to be something that people struggle with. There's going to need to be some etiquette here. Ideally, in my mind, the content long-term moves to something that's a little better about it. Something, in Eureka, there was a little bit of kind of common expectations that we all shared. So ideally, this moves towards that. I don't know that any one server, it's not like there's one server where it's like, yeah, we always early pull and others don't. I think you're just being exposed to more people. And so if 10% of the population was early pulling before, and there were 100 people doing hunts on your server in a given week, that's 10 people. And you get to know those 10 people, you avoid them, and they can only pull as often as those 10 people are online. So if none of those 10 people are online on a Tuesday, it doesn't happen when you run hunts on Tuesdays. Now that we're pulling from an entire data center, and it's 1,000 people, now you've got 100 of those guys, and 100 of those guys cover all 7 days. So the good is being, definitely brought out, but the bad's going to be brought out with it. It's very similar to like when you see something like in the fitness world, people don't like CrossFit. Well, they're saying CrossFit leads to all these weightlifting injuries. Well, weightlifting injuries were happening before, but the level of new people getting into weightlifting was never as much as now that CrossFit's become popular. You guys can tell by my tiny little arms, really affecting me. And so you have to expect the good and the bad. Ideally, it got popular because more people are getting healthy. That's the idea. But the downside of that is if there were injuries at a certain percentage in there, as long as that percentage stays the same or gets lower, it could be actually getting safer. But you're seeing the total number of injuries reported go way, way higher. So this is true in all industries, and it's definitely something that I would hold judgment. I think World Visit's a really exciting thing to do right now, and I think by the time we get to Shadowbringers, that newness is going to wear off, and it will be used for things like social things, the ability to do hunts when your server doesn't have hunts, cross-world link shells kind of leading to that, the ability to do maps, the ability to interact with people that you know from other servers. Maybe I have family members on one server from where I started. Now I'm in a free company that I raid with a guild. And then I've got these other friends that I met through a community I'm in online, a forum, a YouTube channel, a Twitch, whatever. And I want to play with them. And we're all three on the same data center. Unfortunately, due to the server migration at the same time, sometimes one of your three got fragmented. And those people are pretty upset about the migration, reasonably so. But migration aside, because that's really a different topic, and it was an unavoidable thing, and there was never going to be an easy time to do it. It was always going to suck. I would say that this should help kind of level out to where that's the reason to world visit. That it's not this, I want to just go see other houses. Okay, once, but like I don't want to just go visit other houses any more than I want to visit the houses on my server. give it time. Let's all just be patient. Let's see how this plays out. And I don't think they're reversing it either way, but I definitely would say let's see how it plays out before we know if long-term this is really causing harm towards specific content like hunts. Timberlore, not happy. Glad I haven't pre-ordered the expansion. My world server is now filled with ERPers. Whatever floats your boat, but I'm here to play and not with myself. These people are so in your face, it's ruining my game. Can't move. It took me 3 years to get my private house plot in 11 in the beds. So, screwed up. They did a similar thing in 11 and just killed the game. So I didn't play 11. Brian played 11 and 1.0. And so I asked him, he said he didn't know what you were talking about here off the top of his head. So if you could if anybody can elaborate on that, that's something that we don't know there. Glad you haven't pre-ordered the expansion. If you haven't pre-ordered the expansion, if you let your sub lapse, you're going to lose that house regardless. So definitely be sure that you take any possessions you can. And, there's definitely, I think, a way to get some of that money back. Just regardless if you've already decided that you're going to if anybody's decided they're going to make that adjustment. As far as ERP versus RP, I believe that's reportable. So I respond to this. Let's just talk about RP, not specifically anything that's against terms of service or anything like that. Servers change, culture changes. The idea that your world is now filled with people of a different group, I don't see how this could have caused that. Like, my understanding is that Mateus and what is it? I don't know. The two RP servers are both over on Crystal, and so Crystal may have a larger amount of RP going on, but that it's still going to be largely centered on those things. And that what I found in this game is that communities tend to draw tight, just like in the real world. So the PvPers tend to all gravitate to one place so that they can find PvP, and the PvE static guilds tend to all occupy the same kind of places so that they can all pull from each other for statics and stuff, and that the RP group tends to want to be around the RP group, because if you want to play a certain way and you don't want to do it alone, you need to surround yourself with people that want to play that way. So I think that unless for some reason all the people around you sold their house and a whole group of people came in and happened to all be able to buy that house, which is not how buying a house works, having the money is a small part of the battle. I think that this is something that would level out over time. And once again, I think week one is a little early to think that this is going to have drastically ruined culture. I do think that things ruin culture in games long term, and that's things that lead to large scale, like forcing anonymity over getting to know somebody. But the world visit system is about going and seeking out specific communities. Things like maps, where you're in a group. Things like hunts, where you're in a link shell. So they're opt-in, not assigned. So when you talk about Duty Finder or something where you're just tossed into a roulette and then you never see that person again, that allows me to truly be anonymous. But in a hunt, in a map group, if I don't follow the loot rules, if there are loot rules, I just get kicked out. Like, it takes care of itself. And so I don't see how World Visit added or subtracted from that. It didn't make those things better, keep them from happening more often, but it didn't make them worse. It just didn't affect them in my mind. What it made possible was open world content. And open world content is substantially more structured in the people you play with than non-open world content, where you can literally just be randomly assigned. I don't know any of the 7 people in my alliance, and I don't know anybody in the other 2 alliances in my raid, and this is going terrible. This doesn't really change that. So I do think this is an interesting comment, and if there's a trend of this, but with ERP specifically, if you believe that this is leading to things that are ruining your game experience, odds are it's against terms of service. So there is either a way to report them for griefing, or a way to report them for being inappropriate, or a way to report them for hacking. If you believe this is leading to more botters on your server, that's reportable. Everything here that could truly be negative probably already was against terms of service, and now you're just being exposed to it. And so that should just increase the number of people that can report them, and once again should sort itself out. They built quite a community here, and I don't think it's by accident, and I think Square does a great job trying to protect it, to the point sometimes that I've actually said that I think they're overdoing it. So I wouldn't worry about this lasting for too long. Nitsy, WoW did this and it killed the individual server communities. Trust me, you do not want this. This is not what killed the individual server communities. Individual server communities that had formed in Classic started disappearing the moment that they added features. Some of them were added in TBC. Some of them were added in WoW, in Wrath, and those were all well before this. This more stable server structure and the ability to merge people onto things that can scale to the times when servers are really popular and when servers are less popular, and do it in a live and constant environment is not what hurts individual server communities. I saw a lot of comments like this, so I did kind of tweet out to a couple other creators. Definitely feel free to kind of share any of that with any other creators. I just picked a handful that I know I have respect for that have solid opinions on topics like this. And so I do have a couple of their comments here, so I want to kind of go over those, because I played a lot of WoW, and so I know a lot of people see us as a 14 channel because most of our content is 14. But I played WoW from 2004 all the way through the independent area. I've done things from be a progression raider all the way to, you know, playing a ton of PvP to, you know, I still have my old title from like classic PvP. I've been on the verge of being server first for the level grind on the drop of the expansion. I've done lots of crafting. I have grinded. I have played the game in a huge variety of ways. I took a break for Draenor, most of Legion, and I came back at the end of Legion to play BFA. I have a current subscription as of this moment. It expires August 15th. Now that we know we're getting a BlizzCon this year, I may push it to extend into BlizzCon. I'm kind of taking it on a month-over-month basis. I'm not sure I'm willing to buy the big 6-month chunks that I am with Final Fantasy right now, because I'm not as confident that it's a game that best fits my schedule. But I've had a lot of respect for WoW over the years, through its good times and its bad. And to say that I don't know this community, I just wanted to kind of give some context to anybody, because it doesn't necessarily show in our content. So I just wanted to kind of say where I'm coming from as somebody who has played a lot of WoW. I'm not the expert, but I do feel that I have every bit as much of an ownership of that community as the next person. No more, no less. It is a community that has meant a lot to me. Blizzard has been one of the top favorite gaming companies to me over all of time, and I get incredibly hurt when I see them making decisions that hurt them long term, or when somebody bashes them unnecessarily. It is something that's very personal to me, and I'm sad to see some of the decisions they've made as of late, but I do still hold out hope that we'll have a better Blizzard moving forward, and I think they're in a position to give us a better Blizzard moving forward, and I'm hoping that at BlizzCon this year we can see that. I think they're poised to do a lot of really cool things, and I hold out hope that that's what we're going to see from them. So I don't think that better server structure is what killed WoW, but let's go ahead and go over those tweets. I feel like that got a little sidetracked there, but I just wanted to touch on that because I got a lot of comments on recent videos talking about, like, you don't know WoW, and you don't, and it's like, let's just pump the brakes a little. So first I want to introduce this next person. His name is Scott Zone. He was a World of Warcraft player. He streams a lot now. He brings an incredible energy to this. He did not ask for this shout out, but if you like watching Twitch in the middle of the day, he has a consistent schedule. He's just moved to full-time, and he's an incredible creator. He's an incredible asset to the community. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are very lucky to have him, and he brings a level of energy and enthusiasm and level-headedness, yet excitement, that I really look forward to seeing what he does not being late to an expansion, what he does with fresh content. So Scott is somebody that I am very much looking forward to absorbing more content, and I sit and at least lurk in his streams multiple times a week. He's one of the few creators that I've like literally turned Twitch back on where it can use my cell data, and like I got a text from AT&T that said like, hey, you're 75% of the way of getting a bonus on your bill, and so I had to stop watching Scott in the car, but I had him pumping over Bluetooth because I don't even have to look at the footage. I had it face down on the passenger seat, and just listening to Scott is incredible. So I just wanted to say I'm a little bit, fanboying over Scott here, and the fact that you responded really means a lot, because I think these responses were really logical, really sound, and it helped just me kind of confirm that I'm not way out of base, that this is not the things that helped contribute to WoW's downfall. I don't think anything that's caused WoW to be in the unhealthy state it's in today was done by one thing. I think it was a series of decisions. I think those decisions were well-intentioned but missed the mark, and we need to look back and try to learn from them, but I don't think this was one of them. So first of all, Scott says that WoW by any means has not been killed. So when people talk about WoW is dead, I don't like the term dead because it's so finite. We can't give them like a deader score later. Well, man, now they're really dead. So I prefer to talk about them as unhealthy. Like there's still a lot of people that play WoW. So many primarily credit the introduction of cross server to the loss of player identity and player-to-player interactions that occurred during vanilla, TBC, and Wrath, which I agree with. It's hard to compare when the circumstances pre-deployment were different. So I agree with Scott here. TBC and Wrath started to add all sorts of things because people complained about how hard it was to get groups, how hard it was to be part of a guild. There was this term, HORS, homeschool or retired, that you had to be part of that group to be part of a raid group on my server back in the day. And there just wasn't time. And so, like, on one hand, it led to these really close-knit groups, and I actually am lucky enough to be a guest member of one of those communities that was one of the original WoW communities, and I've gotten to know a lot of those people over the year, and the friendships they have with each other is almost intimidating. I mean, it's just beautiful and wonderful, but it was limited to a select few. So in an effort to expand that so that more people could have access to that level of community, they changed a lot about the game. They added these various different things that were like a party finder and a duty finder in Final Fantasy today, and they were their early iterations, and they've changed a lot since then as they've tried to perfect them. And they've done a lot of good, but the cost was that to that select few that got to be part of something really great and have these fond memories, is that really kind of was a casualty. It was a cost of doing that. And so I don't think that the iterations of server structure today are what's causing that. I think the culture change is something that's been taking place in a way the content is deployed, the way we focus on what a dungeon is, how you find a group for a dungeon, what it means to be done with a dungeon, what it means to be in a pickup group. Those are things that are defined, not the technical things. It's like saying, oh, that computers have 64 gig of RAM now, that's why games suck. It's like, I mean, this is literally, it's a technical tool that gives them more options as designers. Their design decisions are what affect our gameplay, is kind of how I feel about this. So let me get to his second tweet here. All right, so the second one here, cross-server world content in WoW didn't cause an issue on its own, it just added to an issue. It accentuated the decentralization of specific server communities, which was a core focus of WoW's original appeal. From my limited knowledge, Final Fantasy had cross-server Duty Finder from the start. I don't believe Duty Finder was in at launch in 1.0, but I'm not sure. That would be a question I'd have to ask Brian. But I know it's been around as long as I remember, and so that is definitely something that I see as a major part of Final Fantasy's community. And I do agree. Like, when we talk about adding tools, all that does is accent what the designer has already intended. It doesn't change what the designer intended. So, like, if the world visit system allows them to spin Eureka up in the same way, where it's an instance per se, but now instead of being hosted on the instance server, it's now hosted on its own world. But you still get there through an NPC that you talk to, and that NPC is doing the effective thing on the back end of teleporting you to a world. That gives them the option to have things like Eureka that doesn't time you out, Eureka that has a larger population cap, Eureka that has multiple zones to it, and quest givers in those zones, and solo content in those zones, and more fates in those zones, and things like that, because it's hosted on its own world, so the size of it can be its own world. And so, like, it gives them a lot of power, but not to be different people than they already were, just to do things that they may have already had in their head, and the only thing stopping them was that the technical capabilities didn't allow for it. And so if their intent is to do things that by accident would cause damage to this side of the community, but their goal is to improve this side, giving them stronger tools, giving them better hardware, better code, better things like that, is just going to allow them to drive that wedge further. And ideally, as that wedge gets further, they go, oh my gosh, I didn't even notice what was going on over here. Let's fix that. Let's bring that back in line. But they're not going to notice it if it's not being affected. So ideally, any damage that does come as a result of this is something that they can either say, you know what, that's just the cost and that's the change, or they can say, let's go ahead and address that, but that at that point, that's been a choice they made, not something they couldn't control. If they choose to let an aspect of the game die, if they choose to never put more Lords of Verminion in the game, that's their choice, not a, well, we wish we could put more Verminion in, and we just can't. The other one is Meoni here. I'm sure many of you already know Meoni. Incredible creator here. Focuses a lot on Final Fantasy XIV. And so if you're not subscribed to both, you should be subscribed to both us and Meoni. It is extremely healthy for an MMORPG to have competition. Otherwise, it becomes stagnant. I think the reason people say it killed WoW is that for the first real time, it lost enough players to other options, better suiting the players' wants and desires. So I think that, in all honesty, when we talk about that, like, Meoni hits it on the head. It is not in Final Fantasy's best interest for WoW to die. It's not in Final Fantasy's best interest for ESO to say they're never releasing another expansion. It's not in their best interest for Guild Wars 2 to say, you know what? 2 was enough and we're done with this one. It is just not the case. Competition better allows people to try new ideas, which is free beta testing. There are all sorts of things like WoW Classic coming out. If you don't think the people at Square Enix, who act kind of in some ways as a publishing arm to Blizzard in that part of the world, so that relationship is already there, if you don't think they're watching Classic intently to say, we have some old MMOs that could use a refresh, I think they are watching incredibly intently, because if it fails or not, Square Enix didn't have to put a dime in to get all that free R&D and say, okay, do we have the same conditions that they had, and do we want the same result they got? If so, let's see how it goes, and then we see what they put in, and then we'll just match that. And so we see this in games all the time where they kind of borrow something from another game and make it their own. So there are things that have existed in other games, and like when Brian and I talk about the M+ system coming into 14, we don't want literally M+. We want 14's version of M+, 14's version of Greater Rifts, 14's version of that, right? Which could have the Palace of the Dead affixes and could have cool little things brought in from all these other dungeons that are really unique mechanics, because the mechanics are so clearly communicated in 14 that if they want to make everything in a dungeon explode, you're going to see those bomb indicators and the blinking. That's already in game. We already know it. So literally it would feel so familiar right from day one. We'd be like, oh, that's going to explode. I immediately know what that's going to do. And so 14's in a position that they can make things really fun and exciting. They don't have to go borrow the affixes from WoW. They don't have to go do it from, like, I don't want WoW's dungeons in 14. I want 14's dungeons to be more in-depth than they are over the life of an expansion, over the life of multiple expansions. Right now, I play them a lot when they first come out, and then I play them less and less and less, and then eventually not at all. And then one day I go into a leveling roulette, and I go, oh my gosh, I cannot remember the last time I was here. What does this boss fight do again? So, like, competition is brilliant, and when we say things like, I see them doing this because they want to become WoW or whatever. No, they're just saying, hey, WoW is doing something. It's giving them the ability to explore their ideas. How do we do something along the same idea, implement it our way, so that we can go do our design ideas? So, good thought. World Visit is nice, but they need more overworld content to make it really special. Right now, it's mostly social, except for hunts and maps. It's not really useful for much else content-wise. Not like overworld fates are important. Yes, fates are basically a dead form of content. Battle leaves are basically a dead form of content. There's constantly things in this game. If you've leveled up your chocobo, you probably haven't leveled up your squadron, in which case the trust system is just another leg in that. So like there's a lot of iterations in this game where they don't build on an old system. They say, you know what, scrap that, and then they redo it, and then if you don't engage with that system in time, it's gone. Look at our relics, for example. Relics are contained within one expansion. They don't really do a great job of influencing what the next relic is outside of giving them ideas, but ultimately for new players, you're totally fine just going into the next relic without any knowledge of Eureka. You'll be fine. You'll be totally fine. The content will take care of itself. And at the end of that expansion, at the end of Shadowbringers, that relic will die, and we will start over for the next group of people. Whether or not you want to be a part of it, that's how these things work. They're like, oh, don't worry about it. You can catch us on the next go. As for whether or not World Visit will be used in overworld content, I do believe it will. I don't believe it will as of the day of 5.0. I believe they rolled it out now because they didn't know if it would go out smoothly, and then it did. But I would assume that if they developed an initial serving of 5.0, they said, you know what, that's already going to be plenty going on. World Visit can help alleviate people who want to quest with a friend on another server. That's great, but it doesn't need to be more than that. And we don't want to design something that's unique and like, oh, you gotta go do this challenge log where it's visit different houses, and that encourages you to visit other worlds or whatever. Because we don't know if World Visit's going to be implemented. Because if we implement it and then it breaks, we're going to turn it off. So, like, I assume at 5.0, but sometime during the 5.x patches, maybe it's 5.3, maybe it's 5.4, right? Maybe it's 5.57. I would think that this gives them the chance to implement something new and different and cool that encourages you to go server to server by design. Not to mention they are going to be using the server-to-server as a way to load tests, so since they know that their player population is less now than it will be on launch day of Shadowbringers, they are asking that at some point in the future, before launch, that they're going to tell us to all go to a server on our data center on the same day, at the same time, to clear the Ixion fate, and it's going to bring that server, it's going to bring at least that zone down. It's going to crash it. That's my guess. But they're basically saying, will it though? Because if it doesn't, way to go Square. So I know Brian and I, if that date is available to us, we will absolutely be on there. And we would love to kind of stream that if possible. But there is a chance that you are looking at us not able to load to our characters because the intent is to see if we can break the server. That is their goal. So if we break it, that's to be expected. If we don't, way to go. So I do think that this is content that they're putting in their tool belt. I just wouldn't immediately assume that it's gonna be apparent in real time what that does. Imagine if this had been out when Blue Mage had been dropped. So imagine if this is out when the next limited job shows up, which I hope is not at the end of next expansion. I hope we get them more often than this, if it's meant to be this side content. I hope we get multiple limited jobs and multiple jobs every expansion. So there's a lot of ways to play PvE in this game. And the world visit system hopefully helps engage with that. Get Array sounds like Sharding in WoW, which really sucked the life out of a lot of servers. You'd be in the same zone, you can't meet, and they would just disappear. And the end of this comment is where I really honed in, is this is something unique compared to everything I just said. I know that this theme showed up a lot in the comments, so many of you had concerns, especially the ones who know how WoW sharding works. I like the idea of an optional opt-out. So when comparing this to sharding, I think it's not fair. They're so inherently different that even though they're trying to tackle the same server problem, how do we get people to servers that are less populated or more populated to give them a better experience? I think of this more along the zone of the war mode, not war mode opt-in system. If you really want to compare apples to apples, even though one is designed to handle world PvP and one's designed to handle visiting each other and playing maps, I would say that war mode is the closest implementation to what they've chosen to do with world visit. Basically, what war mode is you can opt in to being eligible for world PvP or not on World of Warcraft, and you do it from a capital city. Technically, you can drop out of war mode from non-capital cities, but you can only opt in from capital cities. So from those safe kind of elevator spaces. And so once you're out in the world, you've made your decision and you live with that. It feels a lot like that, and it feels like it's optional content. So like in my mind, as long as you don't have a community so small that it fragments it, when you look at like Call of Duty, where they come out with a different kind of maps and a different kind of maps and a different kind of maps, and it just splits you all. I think Final Fantasy kind of suffers from this with their PvP. They've got too many types of PvP, so the little bit of a PvP community they have is fractured across, well, I don't want to play that map. So I think that ideally, if the community is big enough, you can afford, both communities are big enough to be self-sustained, in which case you can put the world PvPers with them and these over here, and then the people who don't like that with them, and it's opt-in, opt-out. So right now, if you don't like maps, if you don't like hunts, if you don't want to visit other worlds, if you don't want to be on other market boards, then don't go. And I think there's enough people that don't want to go that there's still going to be a perfectly viable version of what your server is on your server. But if you do like the idea of, wow, I want to go visit friends, I want to do all these things that are open world, that Party Finder gave me a lot of that taste, but I wanted that last little bit, I really want to do maps with the people that I've been raiding with, then this is that chance to do that. And so I think that it's totally optional. This is 100% optional. So I see a lot of ways this can benefit the game, and a lot of ways this can open up different tool chests to develop Final Fantasy XIV into an even stronger version of what it is today. But I don't really see all the negatives because it's opt-in. Andrew says, to be honest, I'm not a fan of the system. I like it how it is. Common feeling. I had to wait on a queue to get into my own home world just because of visitors. Sure sounds great, and the things they could do, but is it necessary? I see no reason to combine everything. I would rather have separate worlds with great communities that have a community that is large, than have a community that is large and loaded with toxic behavior. We all talk about how great this community is, so it's weird to me that we're all like, this community is great, but like I don't want like other servers with only really my community is great. So like I do kind of feel a little bit like I've seen a lot of this like, oh, the other servers are awful, and yet when I posted videos before where I talk about how great the community is, people are like, oh, it's great, it's great, it's great. So apparently we only feel it's great as long as we're like separate but equal. And I don't necessarily agree with that. Like I'm not trying to make light of this, but like I don't agree with that. I think it is better that you give people more of an ability, because it's not forcing you onto the other worlds. It's saying now if there's a specific type of content you want to do out in the world, and open world content is so underutilized that you're having trouble finding a group, you can pull from a wider array. But if you don't want to do that, then don't. So now, as far as the wait times on your own world, that's something they're going to have to address. So ideally, in my mind, you would set like 2 population caps. You'd set the total max population cap, and then you'd set the number of visitors that you allow, so that somebody can at least log on to their home world more often than not, because that is a bummer. Ideally, unless the reason you can't queue to your home world is because you were visiting somebody else's world, in which case, like, well, how do you know that you're not the reason if they can't go back to theirs? So there's a bit of a traffic jam there. So like, and you're still logged on, so you're good. Like, that's fine. You're good. You can play. I would like to see the world visit system allow you to, if you wanted to, when you log out, pick a world from there, and then it'll just put you in an aetheryte in one of your favorite cities or whatever. Or you have a default city set in settings, or the city where your house is, or the city where your character was created. So like if you were a marauder first, it just bookmarks you for Limsa. And so if you pick a world and you were out in Ruby Sea, then when you log in and you change to a different world, then it goes ahead and says, well, can't put you in Ruby Sea because that's not how this works, so I'll just put you in Limsa. That's something I associate with this character, and off you go. Because I'd like to see people able to get on their own servers. I don't want that to be a reason a server can go down. So like if there's a bunch of people on a server that all go play over here, and then a bunch of other people fall in there, I don't want them coming back and bringing that server down, but it is nice. And I don't want them kicking people. So like ideally they would have enough of a buffer that they account for that server's base population on most days. That still doesn't account for major content drops like the expansion dropping, or major content patches that get a lot of excitement about them. Those are just the best case we can have. Is you can say, hey, your world's not available, would you like to try a different one? Because we want everybody to get online, but what we don't want is the whole server to come down. It's better to let the people who are already online play than bring the whole server down and know nobody gets to play. And I wanted to reiterate this, Jack. This killed WoW. Honestly, how I feel about this is like, this is what did it. Like, I think there's a lot of unhealthy things in WoW. And I cannot iterate this enough. Jack says, this killed WoW. I don't agree. Like, I don't. And you're welcome to your opinion, and we love different opinions here. But I just don't agree. I think that there's a lot of things wrong with WoW. There's a lot of unhealthy things. And I think that you're kind of crying wolf here. Like, this can't be the thing. Because if this is the thing, then the AP grind can't be the thing. And the status of raid drops can't be the thing. And the current way world quests are done can't be the thing. And what they've chosen to do with, like, it can't be WoW tokens. I thought it was WoW tokens. When we talked about tokens, like, oh, tokens killed WoW. Tokens killed WoW. I don't think tokens killed WoW. And apparently this is what killed WoW. So, like, I just don't agree. Like, we can't sit here and say, like, first of all, WoW's not dead. WoW's doing fine. If nobody releases numbers, so we don't know for a fact if 14 is bigger than WoW or not. But it doesn't really matter, because being in the top 2 is huge. And I do think that those are the top 2. I don't think there's any chance that I think 14 has been number 2 for a long time, and so I don't think anything's caught it. And if it's past WoW, that doesn't like suddenly make WoW drop to the bottom. I think it's going to take a while for them to fall if that's what they're going to do. And, I think there's a lot of us like me that stay subscribed to WoW because, honestly, like, I still find joy in going and doing transmog and all these old things. So even if their current content takes a dip for a little while, the games like this are so big that have been running a long time that I can find joy logging into them, just focusing on the part of the game I like. They're so big, I don't need the current content to be perfect. I don't even need the current content to be good. Now, I'm not saying I'll stay subscribed forever if they just never put out good content again, but I am saying that for a little while, I'm willing to tolerate them. This whole idea that we call an expansion dead, 5.0 drops, it's not good. 5.1 drops, it's dead. It's dead to me. It's dead to me. Forget 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. Like, those are all garbage. They don't matter. Like, it's a 2-year expansion cycle. This isn't a one-player game. This isn't God of War, where we can read the initial review that it's Game of the Year and that's true for all of time. A smooth launch of an expansion, a bad launch of an expansion doesn't dictate what that expansion does as a whole. They have 2 years, and they may change course or they may not. But I think reflecting back too early is not fair to these games. And to say that something like a server change, this patch from the gameplay standpoint is so minor. And so this thing really, what changes this about 14 is what it means for what the developers have available to them. This tool on its own, if they never take advantage of it, didn't really change the game. If they say, you know what, we're just going to keep doing things the way we did it, and we're going to re-implement Stormblood exactly the same as Shadowbringers, then World Visit was for nothing. So I don't think it can kill the game on its own. I don't think it can save the game on its own. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool, and it's how they use tools like this, all the tools like this, Duty Finder, hunts, Palace of the Dead, market boards, leaves, fates, player housing, raids, all of these things, crossover events, seasonal events, all these things are what dictate the life of this, not how many players can be in a dungeon, the exact technical specs of a battle class at any given time. Oh, Black Mage is the bottom of DPS, the game is dead. No, like, that stuff is all temporary or is just surface tension as we talk about the core issues, the design philosophies that will come out and be shown by the actual final results. If tanks start to do crappy DPS because they think tanks should do crappy DPS, the second part of that statement is the bigger problem, not the actual result. The intent is what's going to persist year after year, expansion after expansion. If they don't intend for them to do low DPS, then trust me that they're working on it. They're gonna fix it. They've shown us in the past that if they want to fix something, they will fix something. And so if something is not working as intended, then don't worry about it. Just keep telling them that you're upset and trust that they'll fix it. It's a problem though when you say I don't like something and I go, it's working exactly like I wanted it to, because that means it's here to stay. And so I don't think this killed WoW. I saw a lot of these comments, and I just wanted to kind of touch on it one last time. I feel like I'm talking about the same thing over and over, but it isn't what killed WoW. Even if we for a second can agree that WoW is totally dead and will never recover, this isn't the thing. This isn't the one final blow. This isn't the be-all, end-all. This isn't the cause of death. This isn't a contributor to death. This is merely one of the many things that WoW has done over the years with good intentions and really had no lasting effect on its own, but the design philosophies that surrounded it may have. And I think in this case, in the case of comparing Sharding versus World Visit, they were implemented well after those design philosophies were in game, because cross-world like duty finders and cross-world parties and dungeons were the beginning of this, and those were already in before this. So if there was damage being done, it was already being done. Whether or not these systems would have caused it, I can't burn your house down because the house was already on fire. So it just, I don't know. But thank you, Jack. I appreciate you. And I appreciate that people are passionate about this community and they want to defend it. I just disagree. And so that is it. This one went a little longer. I think my last one I only pulled like 3 comments. This one I pulled, I don't know how many that was. It was a lot. And I was overwhelmed by the response to this video. Blown away. You guys are incredible. Thank you so much. My name is Chris with WorkToGame. We want to do community feedbacks like this more often. We want to publish more often. And the encouragement you guys give, even when you disagree with us or you tell me something like your computer sucks, it all is what makes this worth it. Brian and I started this channel because we talked on the phone a lot about video games. I went to college with his brother, and there was this cool guy that I just talked to, anytime our wives would let us, we'd talk about video games together. And we decided, you know what? I wonder if there's other people that feel like we do, and that's you guys. So when a comment lights up my phone, that is what makes this all worth it. That is the reason we started this channel. That is what's given us the fuel to publish some ungodly number of videos at this point, which you guys have watched some insane amount of times. And we really appreciate the opportunities to meet with you guys and the chances to go to FanFest and all of these cool things that WorkToGame has given us. So thank you. Have a great week. My name is Chris with WorkToGame, and I'll see you next time.
What's going on, Workforce? Chuck here. It's been a good long month, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for hitting that subscribe button. I just wanted to invite my friend Terry, the T-Rex from Texas, out here. Howdy, y'all. How's it going? This is a really fun end screen video. We should have written a script, right, Chuck? Oh, I agree totally. In fact, I think both our voices sound exactly the same. What are we to do? I don't know. I think we need to get a better voice actor. Yes, I agree. Which one of us is talking? Ah. They're still here. What are we gonna do? I guess we're gonna stop and record.